Hello friends, welcome to online video on the theme Perspectives of Assessment, Behaviorist, Cognitivist and Constructivist. I am Professor N.K. Das from School of Education and I am going to present on this particular topic. As you know, this topic is part of the course BES 127 Assessment for Learning, and this will be presented in the week 2 of this program, Perspectives of Assessment. In this is module 2, Perspectives of Assessment. There are two content, Perspective Assessment and Assessment of Learning. Now let us go ahead with the session. Now before we go for the session, let us understand what are the learning outcomes of this program. The first is explain the concept of behavioristic perspective of learning and assessment. Second is explain the concept of cognitivist perspective of learning and assessment, and explain the constructivist perspective of learning and assessment. These are three learning outcomes of this program. Now let us come to the program. Perspectives of assessment. When we go to understand what are the different perspective assessment, my assumption that you have already some kind of understanding about the concept of assessment. In earlier videos and in earlier programs, you must have got some kind of understanding of the concept of assessment. But this assessment has some kind of theoretical perspective, and this theoretical perspective emanates from different learning theories that we have studied in our program. And you know, these learning theories, they are mainly behaviorist, cognitivist and constructivist. Before we go to understand perspectives of assessment, let us understand what is behaviorist perspective to learning, cognitivist perspective to learning and constructivist perspective to learning. Learning, according to behaviorist perspective, is the result of influence of external environment on human being. There is an association between stimulus and response which results in some kind of change. The main proponents of this perspective to learning are E.L. Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. Now, main assumption of this learning is manifested by change in human behavior. Environment shapes human behavior. Here, the way you design the learning task and guide your students towards the achievement of learning, that particular environment what you have created essentially shapes the behavior of learner or human behavior. Then contiguity and reinforcement are central to the learning process. So this contiguity and reinforcement are very important in this learning task. Whenever a learner comes out with some kind of response, he is reinforced, he is given some kind of reinforcement, and there are different types of reinforcement: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and the teacher uses very judiciously all these reinforcement. Then learning tasks in this perspective are broken down into small steps, and reinforcement is provided at each step leading towards attainment of learner. Learners are passive recipients to respond to an active environment. They are mostly passive The learning task is designed by teacher, and though the entire learning environment is active, but since it is controlled by the teacher, learners becomes passive. They are passive recipients. This exercise, when same task is repeated, then the learner forms some kind of habit. Particularly, all of us have experience of driving. How a trainer in driving class, when you learn for the first time driving, this trainer at each step gives some kind of reinforcement. Until you achieve the correct response, the trainer will again and again will give some kind of reinforcement until you develop some kind of habit, like applying brake, putting your gear, or handling controlling your steering. All these things, they are part of the training program. Now we come to assessment according to behaviorist perspective. Learning outcomes are experienced in observable behaviors. When we have clearly understood the perspective to learning from behavioristic point of view, it is clearly understood that whatever is observed, that can be only assessed through some kind of measurement and assessment process. Therefore, implicit behavior of learner cannot be assessed through behavioristic perspective. As I have said, in a driving training situation, if you apply the brake properly, then only the trainer says that okay, you have now attained the mastery over how to apply brake correctly, only through observable behavior. Similarly, in a classroom, when a teacher asks questions and you correctly answer, then only the teacher observes that you have correctly answered, then only he or she is sure that learning has taken place. Objective or measurement of ability and achievement. Learners' personal experience and socio-cultural context are not considered in assessment. Here, the kind of experience the learner, his her own experiences, his her own voices, and the context, socio-cultural context where he has groomed himself or he has learned so many things, if they don't come into the picture, they cannot influence this learning process. Therefore, in assessment, those things they do not count. Examination system encourages rote memorization. Mainly in examination, we are concerned with asking students knowledge, understanding level, and the children, they memorize this and answer in the examination. More emphasis on recall and completion type of question in the examination. Complex learning skills like analysis, critical thinking, reflection, problem solving are later, because a student has to memorize a lot, therefore he doesn't go into higher learning skills like analysis, synthesis, critical thinking. Students are ranked as per their performance in the examination. That all of you know, when an achievement test is done or annual examination is done or class test is conducted, then whatever students they get their marks in the exams, they are in a 0 to 100 point interval scale, their performance is marked or graded. Individual assessment on individual needs is not emphasized in this approach. Teaching learning process and assessment are focused on quantification of information. I have already told you that how much mark a student has got in the examination out of 100. Say 90 marks in mathematics, 70 marks in English. They are basically can be understood from behavioristic perspective. Now, understanding cognitive perspective of learning. In cognitive perspective, new information is assimilated and accommodated in one's cognitive structure. Very important. Unlike behaviorist perspective, cognitivists like Jean Piaget, J.S. Brunner, David Ausubel, according to Jean Piaget, the famous cognitive psychologist, there are four developmental stages of learners. These are sensorimotor, 0 to 2 years, pre-operational stage, 2 to 7 years, concrete operational stage, 7 to 12 years, formal operational stage, 12 and beyond that till adult years. And Piaget strongly believes that as per the developmental level of the learner, learning takes place accordingly. For example, 0 to 2 years, when a child is at the toddler stage, you cannot expect a very small child of 1 year to get engaged in abstract thinking or logical thinking. Not possible. So, Piaget strongly believes that as per the developmental stage, we have to think of learning task. Pre-operational stage, where the child gets engaged in object permanence, that means whatever concrete appears to the child, he feels that that is the permanent. A toy, if it is kept before the child thinks that this toy is permanent. And if you take the toy from his side, still then he thinks that toy exists. And gradually when he grows to 2 to 7 years, some kind of identification, recognition starts. And when he goes to concrete operational stage, there he can really classify things, classify different objectives. Then when he goes to formal operational stage, 12 years beyond, then he comes to a stage where he can hypothesize, get engaged in abstract thinking, or logical thinking, or creative thinking. Learning takes place as per the developmental stages of learners and mental readiness of the learners. Child-centered approach is followed, and here, unlike behavioristic perspective, here a lot of importance is given to activity. It relates learning to the previous learning experience of learners in their cognitive structure. Let us look at this diagram. You see this, when we are in our day-to-day activity or in our classroom or in our professional life, wherever we are exposed to a lot of information in this world of information. And in this diagram, you see all these small dots, they are the chunk of information in the world of information, and every time we come across so many information every day, and this information, they are new information, they go to or they travel to our cognition. And if there is similar kind of information already existing in our cognition, then it gets assimilated, accommodated and internalized. Then only meaningful learning takes place, and that is the theory of cognitivist theory of learning. Now, cognitive development of learner determines assessment method as per the cognitive perspective of assessment. So, the teacher has to ensure what is the cognitive development of learner, what type of learning experiences the learner has or the learner possesses. The teacher has to ensure, has to identify, has to explore. Only then the teacher can really go ahead with the assessment method, can devise assessment strategies. And here the assessment is primarily or dominantly individualistic. No uniform method of assessment is applicable here, as each learner is unique and each learner progresses as per his or her developmental process. Assessment is not linear, it is spiral and continuous process. Unlike behaviorist project, assessment can be done stepwise. Here at it takes a spiral nature. The learner's performance in any task takes a spiral form, and this process is continuous. Here assessment or process is important than the product. Assessment is based on developmental stage, experience and exposure of learner, means knowledge is actively constructed by the individual, and learning is an adaptive process based on these experiences. The main proponents of this perspective is Lev Vygotsky. He is a Russian philosopher, educationist, and his theory of social constructivism has revolutionized the entire process of constructivist approach to learning. And you know, National Curriculum Framework 2005, which was developed by NCERT, you may be knowing about NCERT, and it stresses a lot on constructive perspective to learning and constructive perspective to assessment, where learners' experience counts a lot. Learners' personal experience play an important role in constructivist learning. These are personal experience. This experience is gathered through numerous interactions in the socio-cultural environment the learner is situated. For example, the kind of experience an urban child has differs from the kind of experience a tribal child has. Why? Both the children, they exist or they grow in different socio-cultural contexts. And it is the duty of the teacher to find out the kind of socio-cultural environment the child is situated, and accordingly learning tasks can be designed. And in the process of learning, there is active involvement of learner. The learner is given lot of freedom to construct his or her own learning. The teacher is simply a facilitator. The child or the learner is active, and it is his or her subjective knowledge rather than objective knowledge which counts a lot, which matters a lot. His subjective knowledge leads to the kind of learning that will get emerged or generated. How children learn is important, not what do they learn or end product of learning. The process is important. Whatever they learn, how do they learn, what difficulties they face, they are important than what is their learning outcome ultimately. Of course, one has to take into account the end product, but why that end product has come, what process has led to this end product, that has to be also taken into account. Socio-cultural context is important between human cognition and socio-cultural context. As per constructive perspective, assessment is context specific. The teacher has to understand the socio-cultural context as a child is situated, and as per the socio-cultural context, the assessment tools or assessment mechanism has to be devised. Assessment cannot be uniform and cannot be applied uniformly to all learners. The teacher has to have some kind of individualistic assessment. Assessment aims at examining learners' ability to link ideas, apply knowledge and solve problems, helping the learner to modify and repair their thinking through appropriate scaffolding and feedback. The teacher has to provide feedback and appropriate scaffolding, appropriate environment, has to create some kind of environment or some kind of suitable or conducive environment so that the learner is led to attain his desired behavior, or he or she can attain his potentiality. The learner's potential development is very important. A variety of assessment tool is used. Assessment aims at potential development of learners. That means whatever the learner has now and to what extent the learner can be led to in the developmental trajectory, the teacher has to design the learning tasks accordingly. And Vygotsky talks about zone of proximal distance, particularly in this context where we are concerned with development of potential development of learner. Assessment of process of learning along with its product is important. Both are important, but process is more important than product. Self or peer assessment, assessment through learners' profiles. You know, profile or portfolio can be very effective method of assessing students through this perspective. Assessment is spiral and formative. Like cognitive perspective, here assessment is not one kind of business, it is a continuous spiral, and every time you have to carry out assessment and provide feedback to your learner, and ultimately learning can be assessed in a very fruitful and effective manner. So this is about constructive prospective assessment, and with this we come to the end of our session or presentation. In this particular video, our main thrust was understanding different types of different perspectives to assessment or different perspectives of assessment. Mainly we talked about behaviorist perspective, cognitivist perspective and constructivist perspective. And please remember, no perspective is completely exclusive. In a classroom, each perspective has its own role, and as a teacher, you have to look into the kind of learning task that you are going to deal with. There are some learning tasks, they are better executed, implemented through behaviorist perspective. There are some learning tasks which can be better addressed to or implemented through cognitivist or constructive perspective. So therefore, as a teacher, you have to think of different kinds of perspectives to really execute your teaching learning exercise or learning task more effectively. So this was the main message that we want to convey to you through this video program, and we hope that you have learned whatever we have mentioned as our learning outcomes, and further details you can go through the learning materials along with this video. So with this we come to the conclusion of this video. Thank you so much for listening or observing this video program.